This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Two interviews today. First, Gerd Gigerenzer, making his second appearance on my show. Gerd is a German psychologist. He studied the use of bounded rationality and heuristics in decision-making. Currently the director for the Center for Adaptive Behavior and Cognition at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development. He's also a director of the Harding Center for Risk Literacy. That would be the David Harding Center for Risk Literacy. Both of these are in Berlin, Germany. Gerd has a new book out, which I just happened to randomly see on a shelf in Singapore. And I emailed him and I said, "Hey, Gerd, you got to come on the show again. I want to talk about your new book, Risk Savvy." My second interview today is with Brian Wansink. He's an American professor in the fields of consumer behavior and nutritional science. His first book, a major bestseller, was called Mindless Eating. His newest book is called Slim by Design. Everyone has to deal with weight issues. Everyone has to think about food. And Brian has spent a career looking at the data, the science of eating. And he's developed quite a few hacks to help us all. Two great interviews today with two men who have dedicated their lives to very narrow fields. And we are lucky because we get to learn. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Gerd, how are you?
I'm fine. And where are you?
I'm in Saigon today.
In Saigon?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
what are you doing there?
Today, I'm just doing this fine podcast interview with you. But no, I've been spending the last probably 18 months in Asia at various different countries. Yeah. So living and working and back and forth to America as well.
Okay, that may be a very useful experience.
Absolutely. In fact, it makes you very aware of some of the subjects that you're talking about in your book, your newest book, Risk Savvy. So it's let me jump right into that though. Let me. What I would love for you to explain for the audience is, I know you have a good-natured collegial debate with Daniel Kahneman on his perspective, but I wonder if you could outline your perspective and perhaps the difference at how you both see the big picture.
Let's start with the commonalities. So we both believe that people use heuristics, that is, simple rules to make decisions, at least in many situations. The disagreement starts because Daniel Kahneman and many of his followers believe that heuristics are always second best, and that statistics would always give you the right answer, and this is an error. In a world of uncertainty, where you cannot calculate all the risks, statistics and optimization doesn't help. I mean, it brings you to some point, but you never know what is the best solution. And in that kind of problems, heuristics can do very well, as we have shown. Not only do people use heuristics, but heuristics can often be better than so-called optimal. And that leads to a new perspective about heuristics, that they not only can describe how people make decisions, but also prescribe. That is a normative perspective of heuristics that poses the question, can we describe the environment, the situation, in which a simple heuristic, such as divide your money equally over the N assets, can outperform so-called optimization models. And this is the study of ecological rationality.
It is terribly fascinating. And I thought there's some fantastic examples people are definitely going to have to check out your book because we only have a few minutes here today, or at least 30, 40 minutes maybe to chat. But I thought there were some examples to really get people to understand your direction and where your research has gone. And one of the great ones in this new book is the notion of medical checkups. I can't tell you how many, even young people, they'll tell me, hey, I can go to this really cool hospital and I can get a full body scan, perfectly healthy 30-something-year-old person, and they're going to get full body scans looking for every possible thing that can go wrong. You're welcome to address that, but I would love for you to dig into the notion of the PSA test for men, because I do have a lot of men listeners, and frankly, a lot of men that perhaps are of the age where they need to at least ponder the idea of a PSA test. Why don't you talk about the issue of the medical checkup and that test, and that perhaps we've gone a little overboard?
Yeah. So part of my book is about situations where you can actually calculate the risks very clearly, and cancer screening is a good example for that. A PSA test is a test that is about early detection of prostate cancer. Now, in that situation, many Americans don't really think about whether they should participate in PSA testing or not. And rather follow a heuristic like, if you see a white coat, then, do whatever he or she is telling you. So the trusty doctor heuristic. That's a heuristic when doctors know the medical evidence, when doctors don't have conflicts of interest, and when they don't practice defensive decision-making, that is, they protect themselves against you as a potential plaintiff. None of these three conditions holds in the U.S. and also not in many other Western countries. So that means the heuristic trust your doctor is not ecologically rational. And here you need to think yourself. The evidence for PSA tests is quite clear. We do not have evidence that lives are saved. There's a little controversy on whether PSA testing reduces mortality from prostate cancer, maybe when 1 in 1,000 or maybe it's 0 in 1,000, but in total mortality and in total cancer mortality, there's no evidence that there's any difference. But the consequence of this test can be terrible for many men. For instance, most men who have prostate cancer, and that's quite frequent. The older you get, and if you're lucky to live a long life, you almost certainly have some form of prostate cancer. Say 80% of 80-year-olds have some form of prostate cancer, but only 3% die from prostate cancer. So if everyone goes screening and the condition is detected, most of these cancers are only technically cancer, but are not clinically relevant. You die with the cancer, not from the cancer. So, and then there is treatment, and maybe half or so of men being treated end up incontinent for the rest of their lives and impotent in addition. So this is why the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommends against routine prostate cancer screening. Nevertheless, many doctors and clinics recommend prostate cancer screening. And this is for one of these three reasons. Many doctors we have studied don't know the medical evidence. Second, they have conflicts of interest. So clinics earn money from doing the tests and more money from the consequences of surgery, which is, as I said, often unnecessary surgery. And third, there are conflicts, there's defensive decision-making. So many doctors who themselves would never take a PSA test recommend the PSA test to their patients because they want to protect themselves against the patient as the potential plaintiffs. So they don't want to deal with the situation that eventually most men who get old get some kind of prostate cancer and they might sue. the doctor for not having done the PSA test. So this is a very interesting situation. And we develop so-called fact boxes that actually have been originally developed by Lisa Schwartz and Steve Woloshin in Dartmouth College, and have made their way into the Obama healthcare law, but they're never being published. And that is what I think one of the big tools in healthcare to help doctors and patients understand what the medical evidence is. So such a fact box just shows you by using icons like smiling faces and sad faces what happens to 100 men who participate in PSA tests and those who don't 10 years later. And then you can see in mortality, no life is saved, but about 20 of every 100 men suffer from taking the tests, either by having false positives and unnecessary biopsies, or by having actually a non-progressive version of prostate cancer and being treated unnecessarily.
I think you're getting at the heart of what risk savvy is all about, is that when you're going to take risks, do you follow your instincts or is it expert advice? Instincts or expert advice? Gut or expert advice? That's what it comes down to, doesn't it?
Yeah, and with expert advice, you need to be very careful because you need to analyze whether these situations, the conditions that I just mentioned hold, whether the expert knows the evidence, whether there is conflict of interest. The expert may make a choice between giving you the best advice and losing money, and defensive decision-making. On PSA, the man who discovered PSA, Richard Ablin, recently said that no man should routinely take PSA tests. And he ended up saying that I never dreamed, that's a quotation, that my discovery 4 decades ago would lead to such a profit-driven public health disaster. And it's here what I mean, what risk savvy is about, to learn to make informed decisions and also to relax with your anxieties and take the remote control of your emotions again in your own hands.
You know, one of the things that you've brought up in this work, Gerd, too, in your other work is the big question. What is the absolute risk increase? And I have a personal example that I'd like to share with you. So there was a debate online between groups of people that were traveling a lot. They were debating traffic fatalities in the United States versus Thailand. And it was 38 per 100,000 in Thailand are killed, and 11 per 100,000 in the United States are killed. And some people immediately read that and said, oh my gosh, it's 4 times more dangerous to drive in Thailand. And I was like, but hold on, the absolute numbers are pretty close, 38 to 11. It's per 100,000 people. So it seemed like to me a classic example of looking at the relative comparison and not thinking about the absolute risk.
That's a well-known trick, so, to use relative numbers when absolute numbers would give you a very different picture. And the same trick is used, for instance, in cancer screening, where to take another example, take mammography screening. What we know is that out of 1,000 women age 50 who don't participate in screening, 10 years later, about 5 of them die from breast cancer. And among 1,000 women who participate in screening, that's 4. So the reduction is from 5 to 4 out of every 1,000, or in other words, 1 out of 1,000. But that's usually not told to women, but they learn that breast cancer screening reduces mortality from breast cancer by 20%, from 5 to 4 in 1,000, often rounded up to 30 or 35%. I've analyzed the brochures, so the latter has been typical in the UK, In the US, most brochures don't give even numbers because the assumption is that women are frightened of numbers, or maybe they're innumerate, or whatever the assumption is. So American women, most of the time, get no numbers at all about the benefit. They get other numbers that are irrelevant, but not about the benefit. So here we have another case where relative numbers are used to evoke or to mislead people about the benefit of medication. Another example is the Lipitor advertisement that if you take Lipitor or another cholesterol-reducing drug, then you reduce your risk of a stroke by 50%. Isn't that good, 50%? The studies show that out of 100 men or women who are already at high risk because otherwise there's no evidence that these drugs help at all, out of 100 high-risk persons who don't take the drug, so 2 get a stroke, and that reduces to 1. So that's the effect. 50% is the same as 1 percentage point. So here we have, these are simple tools that everyone could learn. Always ask, what's the absolute risk? And don't listen or get impressed by relative numbers.
Hey, Gerd, let me ask you to go in a slightly different direction, which is the notion of romance and getting married. And I'll have to tell you how I came. You were on my show last year, but I was in a bookstore in Singapore, and I was with my girlfriend. And I looked up and I saw your book there, and I said, oh, this is a really interesting guy. He was on my podcast last year. I picked up the book. Now, mind you, this is girlfriend, not married. I pick up the book and I open it. And the very first page I open to is the Benjamin Franklin part talking about building a ledger. And so I started laughing to myself. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what's going on here. How did this just happen? And so I had to read her the passage. But anyways, why don't you explain what Franklin's thinking was in the ledger, and maybe talk about some of the heuristics that apply and have been successful in the notion of romance?
Okay, so Benjamin Franklin, he gave the recipe how to make rational decisions. And it's basically the pro and contra list. And that what later became what every business school or economics school teaches, the maximization of expected utility. In a famous letter to his nephew, he explains him to how, if in doubt, set down all the reasons pro and con, and so on, and weigh them. And then he ends, by the way, if you do not learn it, I apprehend you will never be married. So this is now the received theory. So I have nothing against adding and weighing and pros and cons lists, but they work in a world where you can foresee, you can predict the future very well, in a world of known risk, but not so much in the world of unknown risk, and that in relationships, all kind of things happen that you never foresaw. And I also have asked many of my friends who are economists, mostly men, how they made their own decision about whom to marry. The universal answer was, no, we didn't follow our own theory. I found only one economist who said, of course, I followed my own theory. And he told me that he listed all the alternatives, all the consequences, such as, will you let me work in peace and take care of the children, and then he estimated the probabilities for each of these women that this will actually happen, multiplied it by their utilities, and made the calculation and proposed to the women with the highest expected utility. She accepted. He never told her how to do it. Now they're divorced, but that happens to many people. And some people may laugh about that, but think for a moment. The problem that expected utility theory maximization is proposed as the recipe for everything, for every decision. It's basically statistics, as if statistics would be the answer to everything. Statistics is an enormous important tool, but it works in situations where you can actually be sure that you can predict the world very well. Another thing is modern dating sites use this kind of algorithm for matching partners and weighing hundreds of personality characteristics for the perfect date. I mean, there is that makes me shudder, because it's, how would you be able to predict that? And I would bet that these modern dating sites will not have more success than even the classical way, where someone experienced who knows you very well would have made the decision for you, as it's still the case in many Asian countries.
Yeah.
And there is certainly no evidence that these dating site algorithms lead to romantic relations that are superior to traditional ways of finding partners and lead to kissing fewer frogs.
Well, I think not only is it perhaps crazy that there's a prediction that this can work, maybe it's even more interesting that people actually believe in it.
There is a big movement, and now you're back to the original topic. There's a big movement towards replacing good judgment by algorithms and mistrusting intuitions and good gut feelings. And that's what part of behavioral economics is about. That's what part of the heuristics and biases program is about. You find the statement that human intuition is sometimes good but sometimes bad, which is true, of course. But the statistical optimization models are also sometimes good and sometimes bad. And I think the last financial crisis had made that very clear, that the algorithms of the rating agencies, the value at risk computations that the banks used, created illusions of certainty and prevented no single crisis and predicted none. So we need to think more about a toolbox and not one tool, one hammer that's always right, and human intuition is always wrong. That's a big error.
One of the things that I loved in the book as well, you make the point, if an experienced person with a good track record has a strong hunch about a decision, listen to him or her and don't just demand facts.
I've worked with many large companies and asked the managers from through the entire hierarchy into the executive committee, how often is an important professional decision where you're taking part. Usually they don't do it alone, but in groups. How often is this decision a gut decision? If you do these confidential interviews, you get the answer that about every other decision is at the end a gut decision. And a gut decision is not caprice, not something arbitrary, not a sixth sense or God's insight, but it's a form of unconscious intelligence. So these managers have long time experience. And usually they are buried under a mountain of data, partially contradicting. And then and there's no algorithm to decide whether you should establish a branch in Saigon or not. But if they have a feeling based on their experience where they go, that's a gut decision. And in about half of important decisions in large companies, it's intuition at the end that counts. That means the decision makers can't explain it. But they would never admit to this in public because there's fear of intuition. Because if you make a gut decision, you take the responsibility. And I've observed that in large companies, there are two ways to deal with this anxiety of gut decisions. One is to find reasons after the fact. So an employee is sent to find reasons in the next 2 weeks, and then the decision is presented as a fact-based decision. Or the more expensive version is you hire a consulting firm that finds reasons and presents a 200-page document with PowerPoint. This is all a waste of time, of intelligence, and money, because people have fear to make good intuitive decisions. And one of the reasons is the literature in behavioral economics, in other fields, where people learn that intuitive decisions are suspect. You should mistrust them, and you should trust blindly into logic and probability theory.
Another great example that I think you bring up in your book, that the notion of being risk savvy. Upscale restaurants and in ordering. And what's the best way to order food in an upscale restaurant?
Yeah. So I have learned myself from studying risk-taking in the real world to make decisions faster and more relaxed. So when I'm in an upscale restaurant, and I'm often ending up there after giving a talk, one of the heuristics is I don't even open the menu, but I ask the waiter what he or she would eat this evening here. I don't ask the waiter what she would recommend me, because then she would start to think, oh, that's a German guy, what do Germans eat? And I'm a wrong way. And in a good restaurant, the waiter knows what's happening in the kitchen and what's best today. And I've never regretted this kind of decision. And it leaves you time for conversation. And while many of my dear friends, they cannot not open a menu, and they try to maximize, go through everything and every other piece and every word. And then they often end up with something which is really second best.
It's a great tip, though. It's a great piece of insight.
And it's a simple heuristic. It just illustrates there are many of these heuristics where you actually usually are better off than trying to maximize.
Gerd, one last thing here to expand on, which I think is a really big picture point. And this isn't meant to be a knock at anybody else in the field or anything, but I've seen you say that you viewed risk savvy as an alternative to a flood of popular books that say we're foolish and irrational and that there's not much that can be done about us. But you seem to be making a case in our brief conversation today that there are ways with smart gut judgments that you can navigate much more effective.
Yes. I mean, the risk savvy is what I think the alternative to the view that we are hopeless in taking risks and need to be nudged by governments or other authorities into better behavior. This is not my view of a democracy or of the 21st century. It's old-fashioned paternalism. And also a kind of view of humans as it's more Homo Simpsons. So we have shown that in order to be risk savvy, you need basically two kind of tools. If the situation is one where you can calculate the risk, then you need statistical thinking. And we have shown that despite the flood of publications in the heuristics and biases tradition that try to show again and again that people seem to fail some standards, that we can teach already fourth graders to do complicated statistical inferences that are called Bayesian inference. And most of the fourth graders that we have studied in Germany, in China, can learn this in a blink. While, for instance, Daniel Kahneman, still in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, believes or claims that people would basically not be able to do this because of some mystical system one, or as Thaler and Sunstein in the book Nudge claim that they compare these so-called illusions like the base rate fallacy to visual illusions as suggesting that nobody could unlearn them. This is a big error. And in situation where one cannot calculate the risk, one needs good heuristics. And both of these tools is what can make people risk savvy. That doesn't mean that one always makes the best decision, simply because in a world of uncertainty, nobody can know ahead what the best decision will be. But in general, I see my book Risk Savvy also as a political statement for the 21st century that we should invest more in people rather than blaming them and trying to find ways to nudge them For instance, many of my colleagues think it's impossible to educate people out of their so-called cognitive illusions. Just think ahead. A few centuries ago, few people would have believed that we can ever succeed to teach everyone how to read and to write. The 20th century has managed this in the Western countries. And in the same way, I would bet any money I have that if we only try, we can teach everyone to become risk savvy. And we have shown this at a very young age. And we even can teach doctors to understand medical evidence. I have trained American U.S. federal judges and lawyers in understanding DNA evidence. They all can learn that. There's nothing inborn, misfired in our brain. We have problems, more problems in some ways, but we often can find good representations to understand risks better.
You know, one of the things, and I'll leave you with this, Gerd, one of the things that I love about your work as a former baseball player is the gaze heuristic. But I was thinking even a derivative of that type of heuristic. I used to be a baseball catcher. So let's say the pitcher's throwing the ball in, there's a man on first base, and he's attempting to steal. So we can think of the numbers of calculations going on here. A pitcher's throwing the ball 90 miles an hour. The guy is running from first to second as hard as he can, and I have to catch the ball and throw it down 120 some odd feet to hopefully get him out. There's so many things going on there, but you don't think about it. You just, you stand up, you see the glove down there at second base, and you throw the ball, and you throw it as hard as you can, trying to hit the glove. But you don't do all the trajectories and the calculations in your brain. It's a heuristic of just playing the sport and playing the game.
That's correct. The gaze heuristic is one heuristic that baseball players and also cricket players and soccer goals use. And the point is that usually people think this is a complex problem, how to catch a ball. So we need a complex solution. What would be the complex solution be? Somehow the unconscious calculates the trajectory of the ball by solving differential equations. A number of experts have shown that experienced baseball players do something very different. So the gaze heuristic is one of the heuristics they use that works if the ball is already high up in the air. And you just fixate the ball, second start running, and third, adjust your running speed so that the angle of gaze remains constant. And then you end up there where the ball is coming down. This heuristic can ignore all the information that you would need to calculate the trajectory, including wind, spin, the original distance the ball was kicked or thrown, and so on. And it focuses only on one good reason, which is the angle of gaze. So complex problems can often be solved by simple heuristics. In this case, by just focusing on the one important piece and ignoring the rest.
Well, Gerd, I highly recommend the book Risk Savvy. Everyone can find it on every Amazon site around the world or their local bookstores. What bookstores are still left, but Amazon is going to have it everywhere. And and also the Max Planck Institute, they can find additional work about you there as well, correct?
Okay. Michael, it was a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. I hopefully can do this maybe once a year, Gerd. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care. My second interview today is with Brian Wansink. I hope you enjoy.
We can say, gee, maybe I don't have the speedy metabolism of the person next door. But here's what I can do about it. I can make sure that I don't have a breakfast cereal sitting out on my counter, because if I do, I'm going to weigh 21 pounds more than the neighbor next door, regardless of what their metabolism is. So I'm a big believer that we change what we can change, and we move forward very confidently and very quickly.
I believe this is your lab's motto. If you want to be skinny, do what skinny people do.
Well, it's not really our motto, but it's something we say a lot, because there's a number of studies that we've done almost all of our studies end up being sort of basic lab studies or field studies where we actually change something or manipulate something and see how it influences people. We change the lighting in a restaurant or the music and see how it influences what they order, how much they eat, or how much they like it. But there's other sets of studies we do that are actually correlational, where we're observing people, inferring from that what might be an overlooked solution. Like, for instance, a lot of people say that there's no way you can go to a buffet without getting fat. Well, that's silly. I mean, if you go to any buffet on any day, you're going to find at least a third of the people there are really skinny. But what is it that skinny people do that heavy people don't? Because if we knew what that was, it might give us some indication as well what's going on. And actually, when we did this, we went and observed about 340 people at Chinese buffets around the country, around the U.S. We coded everything from the moment they came to when they left, how many bites they chewed, et cetera, et cetera. We found that the typical skinny person, although they can't really articulate this, what they exhibit are very consistent behaviors. On average, they sit about 16 feet farther from the buffet than the average heavy person. On average, they're about 3 times as likely to face away from the food as a heavy person does. About 73% of them actually scout out the buffet before they pick up a plate, whereas about 77% of heavy people go straight for the plate. Now, somebody can say, well, that's just kind of causal, or this is correlation. We don't really know whether that's causal or not. And that's where that saying comes up that you mentioned. Well, if you want to tip the odds in your favor, hey, don't sit next to the buffet and face the food. It's probably not going to work for you. In fact, I would guess most theory, as well as this correlational data, would say you're going to eat a whole lot more.
There's some people in the self-help world that talk about this from modeling perspective, and I'm curious, were you thinking that at all with that statement? Because it almost sounds like, to me, you could take somebody that perhaps is not very wise about their nutrition, not very wise about their health, and if you literally said, hey, look, here's a nice set of rules, follow what skinny people do. It's like, in some ways, maybe they don't necessarily even have to understand the logic, but if you could model the behavior of skinny people, are you going that far to say that?
That's absolutely true. I mean, I'm a big believer. I've got a co-author who works with peak performing athletes, and one of the things about athletes is what they do is they often just pattern match. If you want to be, let's say, a great running back, great running backs look at what other great running backs do for workouts, and they do that. They don't really say, well, gee, does that fit in my body type? Does that fit my DNA? Does that fit whatever? They kind of go, no, this guy works out 6 times a week, and he does this. I'm going to do the same thing. And it's a tremendous rule of thumb. Do what successful people do. And I think with one of the things that a while back that was done was, it was probably about 20 or 30 years ago, they started this thing called the National Weight Loss Registry. And it's started by some academics, Jim Hill and Rena Wing. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to bring together everybody in America who has lost over 30 pounds and kept it off for 3 years or more. And then they just ask them tons of questions through web-based surveys and things like this to figure out what are the secrets to losing weight and keeping it off. But what we don't know, what isn't known, is why are skinny people perpetually skinny? There's some people we know who, they've never gained a pound in their life. They've never had to lose weight. They've never struggled with their weight. They just seem to be perpetually skinny or slim, let's say perpetually slim by design. We started this registry. We call it the Slim by Design Registry. It's slimbydesign.org. What we do is we invite people to give us their secrets. If they make it through the screening, we ask them about 100 questions. Things like, hey, when you go to a summer barbecue, what do you do differently that heavy people don't? What do you do differently that most people don't? And simply by asking people these specific questions, we're getting tons and tons of ideas as to what these people do, the way they've set up their life to not diet, but just to perpetually be slim by design.
Let me bring up an issue that I think is interesting in my own personal life. So in the last couple of years, I've spent a significant amount of time in Asia. I can use the chopsticks as well as any of my Asian brethren, whatever country I might be in, and it often surprises them. Why don't you talk about the idea of chopsticks? Because I have a feeling there's an advantage over chopsticks versus the big fork and the big spoon, or am I barking up the wrong tree?
No, you're right on target. But with the problem that a lot of the studies that have tried to examine whether people with chopsticks eat less or whether they weigh less or whatever, are often flawed in that they often include people who are Asian, and often, and my wife's from Taiwan, and most Asian people just have a lower BMI to begin with, so it's really kind of confounded there. What chopsticks do give you is a little bit of an opportunity to have smaller bites and to slow down. Now, it's not clear that you eat a whole lot less, because we find if you give people a big fork or a small fork to eat with, they still eat about the same amount. They serve whatever they eat whatever they serve themselves. It's just that it takes them a little longer with a small fork, just like it takes us a little longer with chopsticks. And if it takes us a little too long with chopsticks, it can give our brain a chance to catch up with our stomach and say, whoa, I've eaten way too much.
Well, it does. It forces you to concentrate. Imagine, even if you can't use chopsticks, imagine putting a pair of chopsticks in your hand and you now have to pick up peas. I mean, it forces you to concentrate. You can't just grab that fork and just stab it.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. It's fun.
Hey, listen, I got another issue too that's interesting for me. So my mother, over the years, very thin woman. I don't know, probably, she works out with a trainer. Maybe she's 5'6", maybe 115, 125 pounds, somewhere in that neighborhood. Other members of my family, including my father, have struggled with their weight. I think one of the interesting facts that you put out, which is the quote, nutritional gatekeeper of a home influences an estimated 72% of all the food their family eats. Now, my mother will always say that, well, if she doesn't buy it, the other people that are struggling, they're going to get it anyways. And I always say, no, just don't bring it in the house. I don't live at the same place, obviously, but I always there's like this, it doesn't seemingly make sense. I don't think she necessarily understands how much power she has.
That is very, very true. And what we've found is that if you ask most parents, for instance, about how they can control what their family eats, whether it be a spouse or kids, they basically just throw their hands up in the air and say, there's no way I can control it. They're animals, I tell you. And what is true is they can't control 100% of what their family eats, whether it be their spouse or the kids. But they can control 72%, and they do it in the form of whether they have a fruit bowl on the counter or whether it's a cookie dish on the counter. They do it in terms of whether they take their kids to a place that serves salads or just places that serve like cheesy fries with ranch dressing. They do it if they make a little snack pack for the kid instead of just give them $2 and say, get whatever you like as a snack. And your mom, I think, we don't say mom's wrong. Your mom's got a point, but she has a whole lot more control over what you guys get than she thinks. And even if she brings home some of that nasty stuff every once in a while so that you guys have a treat, as long as she stores it in one out-of-the-way cupboard instead of spreading it across 4 cupboards, which most people do, she's going to be doing you guys a big favor.
That's a great tip. Now that's something where I think everyone listening can say, wow, that's just a concrete, actionable idea. Put it in one place.
Yeah. And a lot of these things that I talk about in Slim by Design and all the solutions that we look at, I see as tools, because tool is something, if you use it, it works for you. And more oftentimes tips are like, hey, here's a cool idea. And somebody kind of goes, oh, that's kind of cool. Like a life hack, which you go, oh, that's a cool life hack. Now let me forget it in the next 3 seconds. Whereas to use these things as tools, things you actually put into place and use, I think transforms their kind of effectiveness and the impact on a person's life.
Let me get people to get inspired to go dig deeper and read your works out there. I would love to dive into an example, which I think people can all relate to. Perhaps they're going to be on an airplane listening to this. Perhaps they're going to be traveling, that they're home. Very diverse audience all around the globe. Restaurants. So what can you inspire, teach, just in the few minutes we have today? I walk into the sushi place. Well, I'm not going to gain much weight eating. I could eat sushi all day long, but I walk into the steak place, the Italian place. I'm not picking on Italian food, but it's a lot of pasta. And we all know that if we eat pasta, we know where it's going to go, a lot of it. So, but when you walk into the restaurant, what are some of those things that are triggering as an expert in this field, a very, very accomplished expert in this field? What is triggering in your head when you walk into a restaurant? And what are some of the things that you can pass along to my audience?
Well, there's a bunch of things you can do when you sit down, but even before you sit down, what we found in agriculture is that we've studied all sorts of restaurants across the country. We've mapped them out, we've measured things and stuff. What we've done is we've looked at what people order based on where they either decide to sit or where they are seated, okay? And one of the things we find is that there's a tremendous relationship between what you order and where you decided to sit, or where the waitress decided to seat you. And then if you end up sitting in that back booth in the corner, you're going to be about 70% more likely to order dessert and about 80% less likely to order salad. You sit next to a TV set, you're almost 100% more likely to order barbecued meat of some sort.
Hold on. Stop for a second. A TV set correlates with barbecued meat. So you're just in trouble if you see a TV set.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and just stay away from those. In fact, I even think stay away from restaurants that have TVs in. It's like, wait a minute. Eating is kind of fun, and you're screwing it up by making me watch some silly news program. Let's stay away from those. Yeah, but what we also find is that, this is kind of cool. We find that when people are just randomly seated, okay, not where they choose to sit, but randomly seated, if you're within 2 tables of the bar, okay, on average, your table is going to order 3 more beers than if you're 1 more table away. The fall off between how close to the bar and how much you drink is dramatic, just between 2 and 3 tables. And if you want to eat more chicken and fish and stuff like that, I usually don't, but if you're a person who does, you will be much better served sitting at one of those high tables than you will at a booth or even at a normal table.
It really becomes kind of possibly a little bit of a fight when you walk in a restaurant, because sometimes the waitresses or waiters, they've got an idea where they want to put you. So you really you're making the case for putting your foot down and consciously saying, I know the math of this, and I'm going to dictate where I sit in this restaurant if you want me.
That's exactly right. And usually, if there's empty spots, they don't really argue. Because again, if you want to be skinny, you do what skinny people do. So that's the first thing I do when I take a look at the restaurant. The second thing I do is when I sit down, we did this really cool study. And actually, one of the things we find is that people, you don't go to a restaurant to start a diet. If you're that person, you're pretty much alienating most of the people around you during the entire mealtime when you're giving them a play-by-play of what you're not ordering or not eating, because you're making them feel guilty. But what we find, and this is kind of cool, is that the real diet buster, it's not the rack of ribs you buy, it's not the entree you buy when you go to a restaurant, because most people don't order an entire rack of ribs every time they go. They order something fairly reasonable. The big diet busters, they're going to be in the other stuff around you. And it's the appetizer, it's the 2 glasses of wine you get, it's the breadsticks you decide to eat, the coffee or latte you get afterwards, the dessert you decide to split. That's the stuff that messes you up. Yeah, so to go to a restaurant and say, I'm going to order the salad and dip my tines of my fork in the dressing on the side. Well, you're not doing yourself a favor, because you're probably going to compensate later that day or that evening by just picking up ice cream or eating more snacks, doing whatever, because you're kind of resentful of having been a good boy or a good girl at mealtime. So what we tell people, we came up with this tool we just called the Slim by Design Restaurant Rule of 2. We tell people, look, go to a restaurant, order something reasonable that you want to order, for the entree. But in addition, you can only have 2 other things. You can have an appetizer, and you can have a piece of bread, or you can have 2 pieces of bread, or you can have a glass of wine and a dessert. But you just can't have one of everything, which is what people usually do. And the powerful thing about this is that it leads people to choose the 2 things they want the most. And based on that, there's nothing to compensate for. There's nothing to sort of reward yourself for later. And it's a great way to eat, in our studies, reportedly about between 25 and 30% fewer calories, but not feel like you owe yourself something.
You know, as I say this, Brian, I'm not trying to pick on any particular chain of grocery stores or places you can buy food. But this summer when I was in the States, I went into a Sam's Club for the first time that maybe ever. And is it a hack that you can actually just say that one of the ways you could avoid gaining excess weight is to not walk into a Sam's Club?
No, no, not at all. Not at all.
It's scary in there, Brian. The portion sizes are off the hook. It's out of control.
Oh, I love it. Well, yesterday, actually, for the last 3 days, one of the senior editors for Mother Jones magazine's been following me around to kind of write a profile and some stuff about the lab. And she happened to ask, where I shop. I said, we buy the bulk of our groceries at either BJ's or Sam's Club. And then the rest of the stuff we just fill in at one of the local stores here. So we got five people in our household, and buying in bulk is a great way, and we have lots of dinner parties too. It's a great way to save a lot of money, but you just can't be silly about it. If you're going to buy, well, actually, I don't think we do buy, the 36 pack of Cheetos, but if you are that type of person who's buying the 36 pack of Cheetos, you have to realize that if you don't do something about it, you're going to eat half of whatever you buy in bulk within the first week of purchasing it. If you want to buy those sort of things in bulk, what you just need to do is either break them into smaller bags, if it's the case of like the 5-gallon barrel of pretzels, or if it's the 36 bags of Cheetos, just make sure you put them in the basement or in some far-off room where you're not seeing them every single time you're opening the cupboard. But I'm a huge believer in the Costco's, the BJ's, the Sam's Clubs, because they take people who want that savings, and holy cow, you do save a lot if you're buying the right stuff and you don't let it go to waste.
Are there peers of yours that disagree with any of your findings? I mean, everything I'm hearing and everything I've seen so far, like this is like just so logically just wise. You're not trying to be perfect about anything. You're just telling people like, here's some math about how this works. Here's some quote, I want to say hacks that people can apply, but I'm trying to find out where's the disagreement here.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say that. I think that's one reason that if you look at food sort of stuff, it tends to be sort of like one extreme or the other extreme. And I offer sort of the third alternative. The public health extreme says, all fast food should be vanquished from the world. All Sam's Clubs should be torched. Okay. And then the other extreme says, no, they have a right to exist. Well, I kind of say, I think I'm the third alternative. I say, given these places are around and given we as people love eating at McDonald's, we love shopping at BJ's and Sam's Club, we love going to Applebee's, what is it that we can do to actually make that work for us rather than against us? And so I think there's some people, nobody would disagree with my results. Some people would sort of disagree, I guess, with my politics of saying, hey, these places have a right to exist because people want them to exist. They can disagree with my politics of saying that, but they don't disagree with kind of my solution of how we make that work for us in our lives and not against us.
Yeah, my libertarian perspective would say yes. I mean, I really don't want to stop somebody from selling, 2,000 calorie slices of pie. I just might not prefer to eat it. I think it becomes a conundrum to regulate on such a micro level. I think that's what's so nice about your work is you're saying, hey, look, Just here's some tools that you can deal with. Because when I look at restaurants, and I look at a place like a Sam's Club, I realize that I'm going up against some of the smartest people in corporate America that simply want me to open my wallet and buy all these things. And they spend a lot of time and energy and money to research they're fighting you. They're on the other side of you, figuring out how to counteract you. I mean, there's some truth to that, isn't there?
Yeah, a couple observations about that. The one being that they really don't care. They don't want to make us fat. No restaurant wants to make us fat. No Sam's Club doesn't want to make us fat. They just want us to buy this stuff. They could care less whether we, throw it away when we leave, feed it to honey badgers, or throw it off parade floats. They just want us to buy this stuff. They're not malevolent in wanting us to be fat. And I think that's important because I think a lot of people out there just assume the food industry is out there to turn us into these, big honking, Jabba the Hutts. But I think the second thing, and I've worked with tons of these people in the past, and what has astonished me over and over again, whether it be in grocery stores, whether it be the smartest people in brand management, they know a whole lot less useful information than you could ever imagine. Most people, especially a lot of people in the public health sort of area, they believe that when we walk in a grocery store, that these owners have every step mapped out. They know exactly what they're going to do. No, they have no idea. In fact, the typical manager is more concerned about whether the teller or the cashier in aisle 3 is stealing money, or whether the produce manager and the cashier number 11 are seeing each other. He's much more concerned with those sort of logistical issues or management issues. And even at the high levels, I talk to all these people at the high levels. I'll say, here's our latest research. And they're like, you are kidding me. That is amazing. I'm like, really? Well, what do you do all day? Aren't you coming up with the cool ideas? Because, and oftentimes I'm surprised they don't. But even in the beginning of Slim by Design, I tell the story about when I took the idea of the 100-calorie pack and first presented it to M&M Mars, Nabisco, and Kellogg's. They looked at me like I was a lunatic. What? People will pay more for less food? That's crazy talk. So I think we give these people a whole lot more credit. And it's funny with journalists. My master's degree is actually in journalism and mass communication. So I know how some journalists think. But every journalist wants to find a new conspiracy story. And they love conspiracies. And I remember a ton of, in fact, a number of journalists would say, yeah, but you know how they set up those grocery stores? They set them up so you buy more. Yeah, they got that milk and that meat way in back, so you have to go through the whole store. See?
Hold on. There's no truth to any of that. You don't think?
No. You say, well, really? What's another explanation? Here's the other explanation. Nobody wants to see ground beef being unloaded to the front door. No, they don't want
That's true.
Oh, hey, here's another explanation. That's harder to have water, refrigeration, and in the middle of the store. It's a whole lot easier to have it in the back and the sides. But most people, it's a lot cooler to think the conspiracy story, and so it's.
Let me bring the hard question in here too, which is the idea. Here you are, you're extremely optimistic guy, and you're trying to help people to see ways that they can shed the pounds, eat less calories. I don't know the figures off the top of my head, but I'm guessing that by any measure, this obesity epidemic in America is growing. It's not going backwards. Is that sometimes hard for you, that here you're working in this field, you're trying to help people, and then you see the curves not going in your favor, at least yet? No,
it's not, because I see there's been 3 groups of people out there in terms of the world. There's if you look at let's say a triangle, you see the top tip of the triangle. They're the nutrition vigilant people. They're the people who are counting calories. And, they might need to lose 4 or 5 pounds, but they're fairly healthy and they kind of keep an eye on stuff. At the bottom part of the triangle, you have this. It's called the nutritionally resigned or just nutritionally disinterested. Well, they just really don't care. Okay, and you have this middle part in between that varies. it's sort of the nutritionally predisposed. They want to eat better, they want to eat a little bit less, they want to enjoy food more. And that's a real big group on January 1st every year. It's probably a smaller group on January 31st every year, but it's right there. But what we can do is we can change our immediate environment so that it helps. If I can, for instance, go to a restaurant and tell the restaurant, if you offer half-sized portions, I'd eat here even more often. And if we can convince that restaurant that they're not going to lose money by offering half-sized portions because people, they buy extras, they maybe eat there more frequently, maybe more people actually go there if they don't have to eat and get bloated. If we can convince a restaurant they can make more money with half-sized portions, all of a sudden, once that change is made, it doesn't just make me better, it doesn't just make my family better, but it makes everybody eat better who wants to go to that restaurant, even if they don't intend to, even if they don't even really want to eat better. They now have an option. If I end up convincing grocery stores, let's say have a candy-free aisle, a candy-free checkout aisle, well, that benefits the people who don't even think they want a candy-free checkout aisle. And so that's why I think this top group, the nutritionally vigilant and maybe the nutritionally predisposed, that for us just to make these small asks of where we eat, where we work, where we shop, where kids go to school, those small asks have a ripple effect across the rest of society to the other 70% of people who really don't care. And that's why the Slim by Design movement, I think, is so powerful. Yeah.
I've seen in your work, this is the idea that the average person makes in excess of 250 decisions about food each day. Can you put that into context for me? I often see these types of statistics with sex or something like that, but you're saying what's worse? Is food worse than sex? Do you know? I don't know.
It's not better than sex.
But I mean, in terms of how many times we think about it, which do we think about more, food or sex? Is food winning?
Actually, it's not winning. And the reason because most people, if you'd ask them how many decisions they make about food every day, they'd say, between 25 and 30. But the typical person believes they make between 25 and 30 decisions about food. Yeah, what we find is that they make closer to, on average, about 200 decisions about food, because it's not just whether you're going to have Trix or Fruity Pebbles for breakfast, okay? But it's how much you're going to pour. It's going to be whether you have a second bowl, how much milk you put in it, whether you're going to finish it, whether you're going to drink the milk, whether you're going to have a little muffin with it, or whether you're going to put jelly on or peanut butter. And almost before you finish breakfast, you made 30 decisions. The problem is, you don't acknowledge most of those as decisions. So as a result, the environment around us, the way we've set up our kitchen, has this incredible influence on these decisions because they're unknowing decisions. So, for instance, the distance we put the cereal box from our hands ends up influencing how much we pour and how likely we are to pour a second box. The lighting in the kitchen, what we're reading and what we decide to watch, these all push us in the direction to mindlessly eat more. But the secret to mindless eating is not mindful eating. Because we don't have the time to do that. Most of us, we get home, we still have a to-do list of like 50 things or 14 things to do. The kids are going feral. One of them doesn't even have pants on. No, to expect us.
Feral? Hold on, feral? Are we in the woods? We're in the woods now, I think.
But just expect somebody to cut a pea in half and taste it and kind of go, am I full yet? And no, that's just not realistic for 95% of us. Yeah. Instead, the solution is simply to change our immediate environment so it works for us rather than against us. Move that serving bowl off the table because we'll eat 20% less of anything that isn't sitting on the table. Use a smaller plate because we'll serve 22% less on a 9.5-inch plate than we will on a 12-inch plate that most of us have. Those are the mindlessly easy solutions to eat less and enjoy it more. What we want to look at becoming is slim by design and not slim by willpower. Slim by willpower is a 24/7 lifetime endeavor. Slim by design, these are things we do once and they're over.
You're proposing a model. You're proposing a system for eating. with rules and measuring things, not just not a diet or, as you say, no willpower. No, it's a different way of looking at an alternative perspective, which is really interesting.
But a powerful way to do this is you tell somebody, oh, hey, here's a few changes you can make. They'll go, okay, yeah, right. Like life hacks, they'll just kind of go, oh, yeah, maybe I should do that, whatever. But if you give somebody a scorecard and you say, hey, take a look at this. Is your kitchen making you fat by design or slim by design? Just fill this out. Take a look. The person, says, hey, is my kitchen counter uncluttered? Is it clear and uncluttered? Well, if yes, then I get a point. Oh, good. Do I serve fruits? Do I serve salad and vegetables and eat them at dinner time before bringing the starch and meat over? Well, if I do, well, I get 2 points. And so it's a very great way for a person to very objectively say, holy cow, I'm not my kids is not making these slim by design. It's not making my kids slim by design, but these are 3 things or 4 things or 5 things I can change tonight and turn the whole thing around.
Brian, was there an aha moment early in your career where you knew you had opened up Pandora's box and you were like, wow, this is just going to be a path that I know I can go down. That's a rich path. I mean, was there something that triggered early on, any particular event or memory for you that you recall?
I did. I actually almost hesitant to mention this, but I think I had a really difficult time in my PhD program, and because I'd been studying this for about 25 years, but nobody really liked it because I'm officially a marketing professor or consumer behavior professor. And when I was an assistant professor, I was in the process of being told I wasn't going to get tenure. Which if you're an academic, that falls in the category of sucking a lot. Okay? And I remember I had written this article which was titled The Antecedents and Consequences of Eating Bouts. Okay? And I showed, hey, what is it that causes people to go on these eating bouts? What are the consequences and how can you interrupt them? And I published it in this journal, and I was at an Ivy League school at the time, and I remember meeting with one of the senior dudes, and he goes, why are you wasting your time on food? Nobody cares about food. He said, why don't you study something important like international marketing strategy? And I kind of went, well, wow, I guess we see things a little differently. And when I told him, no, because I think this is the sort of thing that can change lives, he says, what? You're thinking that people are going to read this stupid journal you're publishing this thing in? Nobody's going to care. They're not going to read it. And it was at that time I very proactively said, every project I start is going to have a purpose and a solution, kind of, let's say, news you can use, punchline to it. And if I don't have that, that's not a project worth my time. And I think that's when things really turned around and started being much more sort of practical and solution-based. And that was 20 years ago this year. So
that's a great tip for anybody out there, regardless of field. Have a purpose and have a solution. I think that's a nice way to wind our conversation down. I mean, I just was jotting that down. I was like, purpose, solution. This is so simple, right?
I've thought of this a lot. That a lot of us, we try to pursue happiness, and I think it's a much more powerful thing to try to pursue a purpose than is to pursue happiness, because happiness makes us self-absorbed. We never can be happy enough, and it oftentimes takes our vision off of either being a giving person or spending time with people we like. But if you try to pursue some sort of purpose, I think that it pushes you in a direction of being a little bit more outwardly focused. And I think at the end of the day, or at the end of, or when we take our last breaths, that's going to be the type of life that people can be more proud of.
The legacy.
Yeah. Based on a purpose.
The new book is Slim by Design. People can find that everywhere. And for your online world, there's a couple different places they can go, right? Well, you want to maybe give off those websites where they can go?
Yeah, slimbydesign.org is pretty cool. And there's also mindlesseating.org. And Mindless Eating was my first book, and that one is like in a gazillion languages because it's been out for a while. And That's a real kind of quick, fun read, and it's oriented more toward like individuals. It's kind of, I think it's pretty eye-opening.
Brian, listen, I appreciate you taking the time today. My guests have gotten very diverse, starting off with a podcast that was fixated more on trading, but I've moved into quite a few of your peers in the psychological world, so it's been quite fun.
Well, thanks. And thanks for what you do, too. I think it provides a great service to people who want to grow.
Thank you for appearing today, Brian, and hopefully we can maybe catch up again in the future.
Let's do it.
Take care. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.